Let's deal with the premise first, because there is no gentle way around it. Predators do not avoid pregnant animals. If anything, the evidence points firmly in the opposite direction. A heavily pregnant animal is slower, less agile, more visible, more tired, and less able to escape across broken ground. And predators are extremely good at identifying exactly those qualities. In most predator-prey systems that have been studied carefully, late pregnancy and post-birth periods are among the most dangerous times in a female's entire life. So the honest answer to the question is that the thing it describes mostly does not happen. That could be the end of it, except that the belief is widespread, it turns up constantly, and there are real observations underneath it that got misread. There are situations where pregnant animals really are harder to kill, and understanding why those situations exist tells you more about how predation actually works than the myth ever could. Let's dig into this properly, because the first thing to establish is how predators choose targets at all. A hunt is an economic decision. Whether or not the animal experiences it that way, chasing prey costs energy, risks injury, and usually fails. Success rates for most large predators are low. The majority of hunts end with nothing. A predator that attacks randomly will starve. So, selection has produced animals that are exceptionally good at reading which individual in a group is most likely to be caught. The cues they use are consistent across species. Predators watch for animals that lag behind the group, that move stiffly, that favor a limb, that are unusually small or unusually old, that are separated from others, or that respond slowly when the group startles. Studies examining the condition of animals actually killed by wolves, lions, and other large predators repeatedly find that the victims skew heavily toward the young, the old, the injured, the diseased, and those in poor body condition. Prime-age healthy adults are killed too, but at rates well below their share of the population. This detail is worth sitting with directly because a late-term pregnant animal sits on the wrong side of nearly every one of those cues. Carrying a substantial percentage of your own body weight reduces top speed, extends stopping distance, and makes sharp turns harder. And sharp turns are precisely how most prey animals escape a faster predator. Pregnancy also shifts the center of mass, changes gait, and increases the energetic cost of every movement. Metabolic demand rises steeply in late gestation, while the animal's ability to forage efficiently may fall. In plain terms, a pregnant ungulate is a slower, heavier, more tired version of an animal that was already being hunted. Let's talk about the energy side too, because this represents a cost that continues well past the birth and is frequently the more dangerous half. Gestation is expensive, but lactation is usually more expensive still. Producing milk for a growing offspring can raise a female mammal's daily energy requirement substantially above her normal baseline, in some species close to doubling it. That demand has to be met by foraging, which means spending more time with the head down, more time in open feeding areas, and more time away from cover. Every one of those is a predation risk in its own right, and the animal has less capacity to run at the end of it. There is a further complication in that a nursing mother is tied to her offspring. A healthy adult without young can flee in whatever direction is safest and keep going. A female with a calf hidden nearby cannot leave the area, cannot run indefinitely, and in many species will actively return toward danger if the young is threatened. Defensive behavior by mothers is well documented and sometimes highly effective. There are records of individual ungulates driving off predators to protect calves, and it is also how a substantial number of them are killed. Because standing your ground against a large carnivore is a fundamentally poor bet that mothers take anyway. The result is that in many species, the female's mortality risk stays elevated for months rather than weeks, and the peak of that risk sits somewhere after the birth rather than before it. That timing is worth noting because it undercuts the premise from another direction. Whatever predators are supposedly respecting during pregnancy, they are certainly not respecting during the period when the mother is most obviously caring for young. Let's talk about what the field data actually shows too, because this represents where the question gets settled. Research on ungulate populations across a range of systems has documented elevated predation risk for females during the calving and fawning period, both for the newborns and for the mothers. Newborn ungulates are among the most heavily predated categories of animal in many ecosystems, with a substantial share of a year's births failing to survive their first weeks. Predators time their own reproduction around this. Wolf, lion, and hyena breeding cycles frequently align so that their own young are being fed during the period when vulnerable prey is most abundant, which is not something that would evolve if predators were avoiding that prey. Some predators appear to detect pregnancy directly. Mammalian pregnancy changes hormone profiles, and hormones and their metabolites leave the body in urine and feces, producing detectable scent differences. Predators with the olfactory equipment to read that information have every incentive to use it, and where this has been examined, the interest goes in the direction you would expect, toward the animal, not away from it. So why does the belief persist? Let's talk about the observations that produced it, because several of them are real. The first involves group defense, and it is substantial. Many prey species do not face predators as individuals. Herds of buffalo, musk oxen, wildebeest, elephants, and many others respond to threats collectively. And that response frequently centers on protecting vulnerable members. Musk oxen form a defensive ring facing outward with young inside. Elephants close around calves. Buffalo have been documented mobbing lions and driving them off, and doing so aggressively enough that lions are regularly injured and sometimes killed. A pregnant or newly calved female inside a well-organized herd may be considerably harder to reach than a healthy solitary animal, and an observer watching a predator abandon an approach might reasonably conclude the predator declined the pregnant animal, when what actually happened is that 30 other animals made the attempt too expensive. The second involves timing, and this is where the biology becomes elegant. Many species give birth in a tight synchronized window rather than spreading births across the year. Wildebeest are the classic example, with the overwhelming majority of calves born within a period of a few weeks. Caribou do something similar. The explanation generally accepted for this is predator swamping, sometimes called predator satiation. If you produce an enormous number of vulnerable newborns simultaneously, local predators can only eat so many. Their appetite and their numbers are fixed in the short term, so the proportion of calves surviving is far higher than it would be if the same number of births were spread across months. It is a brutal arithmetic strategy. The individual calf's survival depends on there being too many others for the predators to get through, and the visible result during that window is an enormous number of newborns walking around unmolested at any given moment, which looks a great deal like predators showing restraint. Let's talk about the effects that never show up as a kill too, because this represents a whole dimension of the relationship that the question misses entirely. Ecologists use the phrase landscape of fear to describe the way prey animals distribute themselves according to perceived risk rather than according to food. An area with excellent grazing and poor sightlines may go largely unused, while a poorer patch with clear views gets grazed heavily. Prey animals adjust vigilance, group size, movement timing, and habitat choice continuously in response to where predators are and where they might be. For a pregnant or nursing female, those adjustments carry a steeper cost because her nutritional requirements are higher at exactly the moment she is being pushed toward safer but worse feeding grounds. The trade-off has measurable consequences. Research in various systems has found that predation risk alone, without any animal being killed, can reduce body condition, delay reproduction, and lower offspring survival, because the mother is eating less than she needs while avoiding danger. Some studies have argued these non-lethal effects can rival direct killing in their overall impact on prey populations, though the size of the effect is debated and varies considerably between systems. That framing changes what the original question is really asking. Whether a predator physically attacks a pregnant animal is only part of the story. Simply being present, being smelled, being possible is enough to reshape where she goes, how much she eats, and how well her offspring does. A predator can reduce a pregnant animal's reproductive success without ever getting near her, which is close to the opposite of avoidance in any meaningful sense. Let's talk about a third factor too, because this represents active choice by the mother rather than anything the predator is doing. Pregnant females in many species change their behavior dramatically as birth approaches, and the changes are consistently about risk. Caribou migrate substantial distances to calving grounds that are poorer in food but carry fewer predators. Mountain goats and bighorn sheep give birth on terrain steep enough that most predators cannot follow safely. Many ungulates become solitary and secretive just before giving birth, seeking dense cover and reducing movement. Newborns of many species are what biologists call hiders, lying motionless and nearly scentless in vegetation, while the mother feeds at a distance and returns only to nurse, which minimizes the cues a predator can detect. All of that produces lower observed predation in specific places at specific times, and none of it involves a predator declining a meal. It involves prey animals accepting real costs, worse grazing, harder terrain, isolation from the herd, in exchange for a lower chance of being found. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Let's talk about where the belief comes from culturally too, because this represents a pattern that shows up far too consistently to be coincidence. Folklore across a great many societies contains stories of dangerous animals sparing pregnant women, mothers with infants, or children. Predators in these stories recognize something and step back. The specific animal changes by region: wolves, bears, big cats, snakes, while the structure of the story stays remarkably stable. There are reasonable explanations for why such stories are appealing without any of them being true. Pregnancy and infancy are periods of genuine helplessness, and a story in which nature itself declines to exploit that helplessness is reassuring in a way that has obvious value to the people telling it. Stories also survive by being told, and a story where the wolf walks away is repeatable in a family setting in a way that the alternative is not. And there is a selection effect in the raw material. A person who survived an encounter with a large predator is available to tell the story, while the ones who did not are represented only by absence. Modern nature media inherited some of this. Wildlife filmmaking has long faced a tension between showing what actually happens and showing what audiences will keep watching, and editorial choices about which kills to include have shifted considerably over the decades. Viewers assembling an impression of predator behavior from that material are working from a filtered sample, and the filtering has generally run toward the version where the vulnerable survive. There is a fourth explanation that deserves mention because it may account for a large share of the belief on its own. Human observers are not neutral. Pregnant animals and newborns trigger strong protective responses in people, and stories about predators sparing them are emotionally satisfying in a way that accurate accounts are not. Wildlife documentaries have historically been selective about what they show, and footage of a predator killing a heavily pregnant animal or a newborn is the kind of material that gets cut. Add to that a long tradition in folklore of animals observing moral codes, and a belief that predators respect pregnancy has plenty of cultural support without needing any biological basis. Let's talk about the one context where something like restraint does appear too, because this represents an honest exception rather than a myth. Predators do avoid certain prey, and the reasons are practical. Animals that are toxic, spiny, foul-tasting, or known to fight back effectively get passed over. Predators also learn to avoid individuals and situations that have previously injured them, and there is documented avoidance of prey showing signs of certain diseases, though the evidence base there varies considerably by system. Some predators avoid unfamiliar prey entirely, taking time to learn whether it is worth attacking. None of these mechanisms has anything to do with pregnancy, but they establish that predator restraint is a real category. It simply operates on entirely different criteria. Let's talk about infanticide too, because this represents the part of the picture that most firmly rules out any protective instinct. In several species, adult males kill the offspring of females they have not fathered young with. Lions provide the best-known case. A male or coalition taking over a pride will frequently kill existing cubs, which brings the females back into reproductive conditions sooner. Comparable behavior is documented in various primates, rodents, bears, and other groups. Some research has also examined whether the stress of a new male's presence can disrupt pregnancy in certain species, an effect studied in laboratory rodents and debated in wild populations. Whatever the details, an animal lineage that specifically targets the offspring of others is not one operating on any principle of sparing the reproductive. Let's talk about the predator's side of it too, because this represents context that makes the behavior comprehensible rather than merely grim. Large predators live much closer to failure than their reputation suggests. Hunt success rates for many of them sit somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 20 attempts depending on species, prey, and conditions. Starvation is a leading cause of death for wild carnivores, and injury sustained during hunting is another. A lion kicked by a zebra or a wolf struck by an elk hoof can end up with a broken jaw or a crushed rib, and an injured predator that cannot hunt does not last long. Under those conditions, selecting the most vulnerable available target is not cruelty or opportunism layered on top of some baseline of restraint. It is the entire viable strategy. A predator that passed up slower prey out of some principle would be selecting itself and its offspring out of existence within a generation or two. The behavior we are asking about could not evolve, because the animals displaying it would be replaced by animals that did not. That is worth stating plainly because it reframes the moral texture of the question. There is no villain here. A wolf taking a heavily pregnant elk is a hungry animal with a narrow margin of survival doing the only thing that reliably works, and the elk's counter-adaptations exist for exactly the same reason. Both sides are running strategies shaped over a very long time by the consequences of failure, and neither has any capacity to opt out. Let's talk about the wider animal world too, because this represents a check on whether the pattern holds beyond the mammals people usually have in mind. It does, and in several cases more starkly. Gravid female reptiles carrying eggs frequently show reduced locomotor performance, and studies on lizards and snakes have measured meaningful drops in sprint speed during that period, with corresponding shifts in behavior toward hiding rather than fleeing. Female fish heavy with eggs are slower swimmers. Birds sitting on nests are famously vulnerable, which is why nest predation is one of the largest sources of mortality in many bird populations and why so much avian behavior, concealed nests, distraction displays, colonial nesting on cliffs and islands, exists to address it. Amphibians and insects show the same basic pattern, with reproduction reliably coinciding with elevated exposure. Frogs congregating to breed produce exactly the sort of dense, noisy, predictable aggregation that predators exploit heavily, and the chorus that attracts mates also attracts everything that eats frogs. Spawning fish runs draw bears, eagles, and seals from considerable distances. Across all of these, there is a consistent shape. Reproduction requires being somewhere specific, at a specific time, in a compromised physical state, frequently in the company of many others doing the same thing. Every part of that is exploitable, and predators across every ecosystem studied have arranged their own lives around exploiting it. Any theory that predators back off during reproduction has to explain why so much of the predator world schedules its year around the opposite. Let's talk about domestic animals too, because this represents where most people actually encounter the belief and where it has practical consequences. Livestock keepers deal with this question constantly, and the accumulated experience is unambiguous. Lambing, calving, and kidding seasons are the periods of heaviest loss to predators in most pastoral systems, which is precisely why so much traditional husbandry is organized around them, bringing pregnant animals into enclosures at night, moving them to fields nearer the house, keeping guardian dogs with the flock, and increasing patrols during the birthing window. None of that effort would exist if predators were leaving pregnant ewes alone. The same knowledge shows up in wildlife management. Programs dealing with declining ungulate populations frequently focus on calf survival rates during the first weeks of life, because that is where the losses concentrate. Predator control efforts, where they are used, are often timed to the birthing season for the same reason, and the effectiveness and ethics of those programs are argued over vigorously by people with different views about wildlife management. The relevant point here is narrower and not really disputed by any side. Everyone involved agrees about when the vulnerable period is. Let's zoom out and pull all of these different threads together. Predators select prey by vulnerability, and pregnancy increases vulnerability across nearly every dimension that matters: speed, agility, endurance, and the ability to keep up with a group. The field evidence shows elevated rather than reduced predation around birthing periods, and predator reproduction is frequently timed to exploit exactly that abundance. The belief that predators avoid pregnant animals appears to come from a combination of four things: herds defending vulnerable members effectively, synchronized birthing that overwhelms local predator capacity, mothers deliberately relocating to safer terrain, and concealing newborns, and human storytelling that prefers the version where the wolf shows mercy. What is actually happening is considerably more impressive than restraint. Prey species have evolved an entire suite of countermeasures. collective defense, mass synchronized birth, migration to poor but safe ground, concealment behavior in newborns, precisely because predators do not spare them. Every one of those adaptations exists as an answer to a threat that is entirely real, which leaves an interesting thought worth sitting with. The safety that a pregnant animal enjoys was not granted to her by anything with teeth. It was built over an enormous span of time by every generation of her ancestors that found a way to make the most dangerous months of their lives survivable.